Anyway, we are now joined on the line by Iain Dalton. Iain, you are from the... let's see if I can get this right. You're from the TUSC, which is the well, you tell me what TUSC is. The Trade Unionist and
Where are you from? Where are you from?
From the Trade Unions and Socialist Coalition. I'm the West Yorkshire convener of it.
As I started to say that, I thought I'm going to stutter over that. I just thought Trade Unionist and Socialist. Yeah, okay. So you've been looking into the council proposals across West Yorkshire. And things are tricky, aren't they? All the councils have got budget gaps.
Yeah, they've all overspent on last year's budget. Obviously, Bradford was the highest in that. That's what necessitated the capitalisation directive from the government, which allowed them to borrow money to fund day-to-day expenditure and use asset sales to fund day-to-day expenditure. But combined last year, that comes to something in the region of £190 million across West Yorkshire. And then this year's budget gap, so the gap between what council think they've got money coming in and where and what they are going to spend unless they make cuts, is 207.2 million from the latest
worse
figures.
Than last year.
Wow.
Yes. It's a more difficult situation. That's for a number of reasons. One of which is, and councillors will tell you this, that increasingly there's things that are ring-fenced that they need to spend on, things like social care, that are the costs of that are going up and up, and they're not getting the same level of funding to kind of match that from the national government. But then, as well, they've had central funding removed over a long period of time, and when they're coming to fill in these shortfalls now, there's less and less things left that the councils are providing that are there that could be targets for cuts. And,
when we were talking about that this time last year, we discovered the shocking statistic that 87% of Bradford Council's budget is gone on adult social care and children's social services.
Yeah.
Leaving 13% for everything else: streetlights, potholes, libraries, museums, emptying your bins. You name all the things that the council has to do, maintain parks, public rights of way. All of those things. There's only 13% of the budget left for that, because all the rest of it has gone before they even start.
Yeah, and as Trade Union Socialist Coalition has pointed out for some time now, this was the inevitable consequence of councils carrying out the cuts mandated 15 years or so ago and ever since, is that you're going to have less and less things that are left that can be cut, that you're providing for people. And, we've got councils wanting to put up, I'm sure we'll talk about the 15% proposal in a minute. But, all councils have been putting up their council tax bills by the maximum amount. Pretty much every council every year has, with a few exceptions.
So Bradford Council is seeking permission to increase its council tax by 15%, which is more than it would normally be allowed to do.
Where do they think that we're getting that money from?
That's the exact point that we would make. It's another way of making working class people pay for the funding shortfalls that we've had from central government from all that time, and that was done back then to fund tax cuts to corporation tax and so on. We would make the point there's plenty of wealth in Britain. It's just being concentrated ever more, with more and more billionaires year on year in Britain at the top of society, and ordinary people are being asked to accept more and more squeezed living standards over that period of time.
Let's wind this back a little bit. So let's go back to 2008. When Northern Rock goes bust, Bradford and Bingley goes bust, the Halifax goes bust, and Bradford and Bingley, massive employer locally, the Halifax, massive employer locally. So that banking crisis, it costs something like £890 billion to bail out the banking sector, and then that's where we had quantitative easing, and we had. First of all, we had the the coalition government of the Conservatives and the Democrats. Then we have the Conservatives on their own with a rotating door of prime ministers. Now we have a Labour government. But all of those parties have been cutting the funding to councils. Because it's still happening now, but the Labour government are still cutting the funding to councils, aren't they?
Yeah, they've announced some increases, but it's not sufficient to meet the gap that exists. So it's in real terms for what people on the doorstep are seeing, then it's less money to provide the existing services. And, you mentioned quite a few things like the banks, the quantitative easing. At every step, though, those measures have been exploited to shift wealth away from ordinary people. So the quantitative easing was used by banks and financial speculators to borrow cheaply, and now obviously that cheap money situation is gone. The banks were sold back the less money than was spent to bail them out when the government privatised the likes of Lloyds TSB and so on. This is a net effect of where we've got to, and what we've seen is not just that the situation's getting worse, but actually there's more campaigning taking place now against this, because what people may have accepted over the last 10 years as well, we've just got to get through it, put our heads down and hope it goes away. Now people are seeing things that people really, really depend on. And obviously there was things cut 10 years ago that people depended on, but now we're seeing, campaign groups come out in open opposition to these things, because, they're going to have very drastic effects on people's lives. When you've got Leeds Council, for example, wanting to get rid of half the Crown Bowling Greens in the city, when you've got the 2 bus services in Bradford that the council proposes to get rid of, when you've got dementia
protests at St Joseph's and St Bede's for 2 Catholic schools,
and dementia care homes in Kirklees, where where the council was wanting to close them, now wants to privatise them, those measures will have very drastic effects on people's lives. And unfortunately, when you look at what some of the councils are saying about how much more money in cuts they need to stabilise themselves over the next 5 years, based on the projections, then you've got Wakefield Council saying it's got an 88 million black hole. Leeds City Council is talking, several times more than that. Bradford are saying that to cover the costs of this capitalisation directive, they'll need to make £50 million worth of cuts every year, but also they'll have £640 million that will need to go in total to pay off this capitalisation directive. And that's the reason why the council are moving to this idea of higher council tax rates.
Let's just give you some big numbers. They're hard to get your head around, but let's give some context to this, because Bradford, we're quite excited. We are City of Culture. Mm-hmm. There's loads of great things happening in Bradford, but the City of Culture budget is an extra bit of money that comes from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. It's extra money. It's £15 million. That's it. The £15 million that pays for all of the amazing things that City of Culture is doing is not enough. If we stop doing all of those things and just put that into the council budget, rather than have a £50 million shortfall, we'd have a £35 million shortfall. So,
you can see why people get frustrated.
You can, of course you can.
I saw it all over. I think it was like social media a few weeks ago. There were people complaining about, the gritters not coming down the streets, and everyone was like, oh, well, there will be none because they're all in Bradford Town Centre getting ready for the Rise event, which, the Rise event were a great event.
Yeah.
But when the city is, struggling as it is,
well, that's the thing, because
you're never going to please everyone.
Yeah, and just on gritting, though, Coaldale Council were proposing to reduce the gritting services they did, and obviously have gone back on that, given the weather we've had over the last couple of months. What we're saying in the Trade Union Socialist Coalition is that you can't keep asking ordinary people to dig into their pockets, or to dig into their pockets either in terms of more counter tax or in terms of having to fund things that were publicly provided, things that places took great pleasure in having decent quality libraries, museums, other services in cities, and that we need to actually shift some of the wealth in society to actually, ensure that ordinary people have a reasonable standard of living. I say we've seen more people campaigning, and I think in the local elections this year, then there had been this, breakthrough in a couple of areas where the Labour councils lost, a reasonable number of seats to independents. Now that was partially over the question of the Gaza conflict and the Labour Party's national stance on that, but it's also over some of the cuts. So in Kirklees, you had one of the leaders of the anti-cuts campaign there be elected as an independent councillor. One of the Bradford independents spoke up against the bus route cuts.
People are desperate for change, aren't they? And people are desperate for change. They've had 14 years of cuts, and it's been all different parties, and there's not a lot left to cut. We are almost out of time, so we have to cut this short. Just see what I did there.
The one point I'd leave is obviously there's no elections this year, but in 2026 it's all out elections in Bradford. It's all out elections in Kirklees. We think that there'll be a lot more people wanting to come forward and put themselves forward as an alternative, and that's what the Trade Union Socialist Coalition wants to help bring about, is a challenge to the cuts, that can fight for the services to be kept in our cities that ordinary people need.
Iain,